Every once in a while, I'll have students who want to develop musicality in their soloing, or they're unhappy with their soloing because they feel like they're not playing very musically. And the problem with that term is that it's a slippery slope, and it's also a loaded question, really. Like, how do I play more musical? I can't do anything for those students, and I've accepted that now. So now I've been teaching 19 years professionally, and for many years I did try. Oh, you could do this, you could play this way and this way. But what I realized I was doing was I was showing them my preferences that I've developed from my experiences. I think the best way to find the musicality that you want to have as a resource for you to put into your playing is to actually play, especially in solos, actually play solos that you find very musically. And even if they're challenging, especially if they're challenging, because that will up your ability to phrase, up your ability to play technically and combine those two, your phrasing and your technique. So that being said, what I can do for people is I can either point them in the direction to be able to locate that, or I can provide them the tools to be able to extract the information out of that so that they can use it outside of the context of just that solo, for instance, in a different key, or rearranging the notes either sequentially or in some kind of music theory fashion. We're talking, harmonizing by thirds or sixths, or anything um, like that, as that relates to the original idea. And that's where the flow of creativity comes from. As you start to have a reference idea, you go, how many ways can I uh, develop it, or how many ways can I expand upon it? And what we do when we improvise is that we decide these things in a fraction of a second. We do it very, very, very quickly. So, in order to prepare for that, find a solo that you really admire, something that you really something that really captivates you and allows you to be curious about what's in it and why it works so well the way it does and why it sounds so good, and learn to play it. That would be the number one way, is to get your hands on it, learn to play it in time, right? The other way is also just study, so you could study it, but you need the academic information to really pull from that. So any sort of transcriptions, anything where the solo's notated, anything where you also understand what the harmony is behind it. So that gives you an idea about why the note choices then work, especially when you're going into something much more progressive, or in jazz or jazz fusion, especially, which is a combination of those two. Um, that sort of becomes paramount. That becomes something that you want to really dive into and start coming up with these philosophical ideas, your own philosophical ideas of why the music makes you feel the way it does, why it has the actual effect on you. There is no scientific answer for that. There is no right or correct answer for that. So, musicality is really your journey to try to play the music that you admire, so that it's out there, it's somebody else's, right? And that you could turn it into something that you yourself can do. And if you can't do it at all, when you first start to do it, you want to just start to do it in the smallest of capacities, right? You're just, the chord progression is finishing up and you're soloing. You're like, let me end with a little fast thing, similar to like something like Stairway to Heaven, like Jimmy Page ends with the right. It's a little fast thing that basically brings a solo to a climax, right? He actually decides where the most intense part is. And one of the things that I learned in grad school, from a wonderful teacher, Dr. Amparo Fabra Crespo, was that every piece of music has a climax, right? Mostly it's like two-thirds of the way through. That's sort of like the standard spot. But when it comes to guitar solos, most of the time it's actually at the end. That's where like all my sort of heroes and all that, especially like playing a lot of metal and shred and all that kind of stuff. Mostly it's sort of the big finale, the big finisher. It's always cool when somebody does something interesting sort of in the middle, but then or especially something with a lot of flair, something really interesting. I'm just sort of thinking about some Holdsworth solos. I feel like he's the very best, most musical um, guitar soloist. Again, that's just my preference. It has no bearing or meaning, right? But when I think about my solos and playing a solo and developing it, I'm always thinking of like sort of what's the next Holdsworthian thing I can do. I already started learning from Holdsworth. I already started analyzing some of his music. I already started understanding a bit more about his philosophy and his approach to music, right? So how do I realize that in the moment to get it to sound to me, Holdsworthy? How do I, and that's what it comes from. You have to actually have a reference first. If you have nothing that you admire and you're not trying to reach somewhere that exists, then you're really capped out. You just feel like, well, I'm playing the notes and the chords, it sounds okay. I guess that's all I need. But then that's very unfulfilling. And that's why a lot of people are unhappy with their soloing, even though they might know a lot of positions or they might know, even their notes on the fretboard and all that. When it comes to feeling fulfilled from what you create, it really comes down to intention. So if you want to play intentionally, you really have to go after the intention very meticulously. And when you do that, then you understand very academically and very concisely what information, what kind of textures, what kind of range, what kind of techniques, what kind of articulation. All of that becomes your preferences for how you choose to express yourself. And before you know it, by training one of those things at a time, you'll have your own musicality and your own style develop. But it really does require training small aspects one at a time. And the deeper you go with each one, the more capable you become with each one. So that's what I would say is the answer to finding musicality. No one can teach it to you. You must find it yourself, but you can be pointed in the right direction. So thanks so much.